everybody. Today I'm going to be working on 07 Ford Edge. I got to change out rear wheel bearings or hubs, the CV axles, and the seals at the differential on either side. I already did the right side. I've done this a couple of times on this car, and actually this will be the second time I did it. About 80,000 miles I did it. This is my winter car. I just kind of drive it in the bad weather. And then now we're at like 245-ish, 245,000, so it's got quite a few miles on it. I kind of cheaped out on the material. Just bought some cheap stuff off of Rock Auto just to get the car back up and running. But anyway, kind of went through the right rear last night, and now today I'm going to be working on the left rear. So I'll kind of show you what I got going here, kind of go through how I do it, and go from there. So I'm going to be changing out this hub, the CV axle, which is right down there, and then there's a seal that's up in. You can kind of see that boot in there, way in. On the axle, there's a seal in the differential behind that. So first and foremost, whenever you're working on these vehicles, underneath anything or around it, make sure you got jack stands to support that vehicle. I typically leave my floor jack underneath the rear differential, and then I have the jack stands sitting there as well. You can kind of see the jack stands right there. And just to make sure that you're safe if you're ever dealing with any type of vehicle stuff. Lighting issues. Anyway, I just want to make sure that if anybody's working on stuff that they're watching these videos, they make sure that they're not getting themselves hurt, because you can get severely hurt. So just make sure you're being safe. So first thing I'm going to do, I'll go ahead and start getting this brake stuff off here. These rotors are pretty corroded, but there again, this car, for the mileage that's on it for now, I'm just going to leave them. They're still working. The pads are fine. At least the pads on the other side were fine. But anyway, start getting the brake stuff off, and then we'll slowly start taking like the emergency brake stuff off. The wheel speed sensor comes out, and get the rotor out of the way. And then we start working on getting these big bolts out. There's 3 large bolts, one up here. There's one down underneath here. And there's one in the front. And then we also have to work on getting this link out. Sway bar link, that has to come out. It's kind of a pain. The other one came out okay. And then once we do that, then we can bust this nut loose right here. That'll come out, and we should be able to, oh, I forgot, there's also four or 5 bolts up underneath. I'll show you those when we get to that. The other side I can only get 4 out, but I was able to make it work. I can kind of swing this big control arm out of the way and then be able to get things together. But anyway, that's what we're going to do. So we'll get started on that right now. So take these bolts out that I just took out. It's 14 millimeter. This is a 10 millimeter. It's all going to be metric. The only big stuff you're going to probably need is when he gets ready to take the axle nut off, you're going to need a 32 millimeter. I run that off with an impact. So get that out of the way. I just kind of hook it over in here, something like that. To get the wheel speed sensor, it's going to be an 8 millimeter. Everything's pretty rusty, crusty in here. This car's got a lot of miles on it, so I hope everything comes apart. And that just broke. That's great. Well, we'll have to dig that out of there. Good pair of pliers for that. Things were going so well. This back here is a 15 millimeter. I try to use anti-seize on everything. Sometimes those small bolts, they just don't, no matter what you do to them, they get rusted up and that's that. But everything else, anti-seize. And then they come right out. I've always used anti-seize. Some people say don't use anti-seize on brake components, bolts, hardware. You do whatever you want. I've always used it. It's always worked for me. And these pads look good enough as well. An issue here is the emergency brake hardware is still on this side. I took it off the other side because the shoes are delaminated. I don't use the emergency brake anyway. So the fun part will be getting this spread with the emergency brake hardware in there. So I'll work on that for a little bit. Alright, so I got that rotor off. Basically this hoop shoe in here is what kind of gets stuck and there's rust in behind the rotor. So I'm just going to get this off of here. Like I said, I don't use the e-brake anyway. So basically you just got this and there's a spring that hooks in here. That's it. So that's the gist of it. Right there. Like I said, eventually these pads start to come off like this one is here. And then they'll get hung up inside that rotor and scare you half to death. So this one was about to do it. So good thing it's off. Get that junk out of here. Alright, next thing I'll work on getting this emergency brake cable back here off, which goes up to the front. It's these two bolts right here. I believe those are 10 millimeters. bolts are out. Next thing is I want to work on this here. That basically is just the sway bar link. So it's a 15mm nut, and then on the inside you got to have an 18mm wrench. You just kind of got to wedge that wrench down in there until it catches. It's like a square nut. Sometimes it's kind of a pain to get to. I use a deep well 15. It's hard to tell sometimes if that's working or not. Sometimes you got to get your head poked in behind there. See if the whole stud is spinning. And the whole thing's spinning, so I'll have to work on this for a little bit, see if I can get that to break loose. Alright, well, couldn't get that bolt to come loose, so sometimes you ask, and sometimes you tell. And that time we had to tell. So, I'll have to get a new sway bar link, but anyway, on to the next step. Before I take any of the bolts out, the main bolts on the arm here, there's this one, there's this one down here, you can see that head right there, and then there's one on this side right there. Before I take any of those out, I have another small floor jack, and what I do with that floor jack is I take and slide that in and take pressure off of that lower control arm. So basically just kind of in underneath the shock. You are still going to have to take that shock bolt out that's right here. You can see the head of the bolt right there. That'll have to slide out, so you just want to make sure that you can get that out of there. So basically then I just kind of take a little bit of pressure off of everything here, so that way when I take this bottom bolt out, that control arm doesn't just fly out of there and that spring goes flying. So I've done it that way several times. I've never had an issue, but just want to make sure you're kind of controlling that so it doesn't go crazy on you. So now that we got that done, now we can start taking the rest of these bolts out that hold that control arm in place. So one side of that's going to be a 21. I think the other side is a 18. Yeah. 18 and 21. And I always just like to kind of make sure that it's going to move a little bit before I go wrapping on it with the impact, just to make sure it's not froze up in there. There's one. This one down here is the same thing. 18 and a 21 on the inside, on the nut side, I should say. And then this one on the front, that's also an 18. And that one, the nut should be captured in the back. That's all of those. And now that we have that all loose, take the shock bolt out. That's also an 18. And then I usually just take that nut, start it back on several threads, and then I'll just take a hammer and just kind of tap on that. Usually it comes right out. And then you can just pull that shock kind of upward a little bit and push that bolt right out. And that's out. And then what I'll do is I'll take a shock and just kind of work that up out of that whole the frame here, and just kind of let the shock hang to the back here, just like that. Just kind of out of the way. Shock will stay there. That shock does need to be replaced. Actually, all the shocks need to be replaced, but there again, it's just a work car, so letting it ride. Kind of let that hang down in there. Now the only thing we got left is that there's 5 bolts up underneath here, and those are going to be a 13, I believe. So let's see. Up here, you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the 5th one is up there somewhere. Anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and take those out, and then this whole control arm should drop down. Okay, we got all those out. Now the last thing, we'll be taking this big nut off of your axle. Like I said, that's a 32 millimeter. And I just do a little wrap on there. That's loose. That comes down. Pry bar. I take and just get a pry bar in here. Just pry on that lower control arm. Bigger pry bar. That's it. It's out. So just kind of let that hang like that for a minute. And then if you look in here, there's, you can see two of them right there. There's 4 bolts. Those are Torx. Basically, you take those 4 bolts out, and then that hub assembly will come out. So we'll work on that. And that's going to be a T60. Give a couple wraps with a hammer, and then there's this emergency brake lever. That's kind of a pain, but that just kind of pops out of there like that. And then there it is. And now the other thing you got to do is that hub is in this backer plate, and this knuckle here, or whatever you want to call it, housing, brake assembly housing. Basically, just get that out of the way. I just take a hammer, at least the last time I did this, and it seemed to work fine. And I just tap around the hub. Hub's junk anyway. And then once you get it down to that frame, then you can just take and hit the center of the hub. There it is. It's apart. So crunchy, crunchy, crunchy. Now to clean up the mess, the other thing I got to do is that axle's got to come out, and typically that just pulls right out of there. At least it should. Hopefully that's the case. And then I got to get to that seal. So we'll see if we can. Well, I just pulled the whole housing apart. That's great. I'll try to get that pulled out of there. So I'll have to get underneath there, get a hold of that, the rest of that axle, and we'll get that pulled out of the assembly, and then I'll show you when it comes to putting the seal in. Alright, so I finally got that the rest of that axle shaft out of the rear differential. You can see that that seal is right there. Easiest way that I found to do this, I think they make seal pullers, but I just take a pry bar with a sharp tip on it, and I just start working on that flange, basically I'll just start right in here and just get that flange to pop out, and then I'll just kind of use the pry bar and just go around, and you get about just a quarter of the way around that seal, and then the whole seal will just pop right out of there. So that'll be what I'm going to do next. And then once that seal is out, I'll get that housing cleaned up and silicone up. I just use a little bit of gasket maker, or gasket sealant I should say, and just put a little bit around the lip all the way around that seal, on the new seal, and then I'll drive that new seal in, and then we can start reassembly. Alright, I got the new seal installed. That's what it looks like right there. Just cleaned up the housing, a little bit of sealant on there, and drive it in. Like I said, you don't want a ton. I mean, I don't even hardly see any coming out. I can see just a little bit coming out there, and that's all you want. You don't want to overkill it. There's already a seal on that, or a gasket, whatever you want to call it, on the inner part of that seals out against the housing, but I just like to do a little bit more so I don't have to worry about it. And now our next step is going to be getting that new axle slid in, and then we'll start reassembly. Alright, so this axle has a little clip. You can see that little clip that I'm moving around. When I put these in, I try to put them in, it's kind of hard to see, but it's split. Right there you can kind of see a split. I try to put it in so that that split is hanging and the closed part of it is down, because when you go to push that axle in, if the open part is hanging down, those maybe could catch, and you might struggle with that a little bit. So that's how I like to try to put them in there. So I'll just take and slide that axle in. And just line it up. Find the spline right there. Then give it a good push. And that should be in there. I will crawl underneath there and just verify that it is in all the way. But basically, that's the gist of that. So after a little bit of persuasion, had to grind on that a little bit. Heat, couldn't get it, so I ended up just drilling it. I was able to get that bolt out. And now I'm going to chase the threads. That's a metric bolt. I'm guessing maybe a 6 mil. So I'll grab a wrench and see if I can chase those threads out. And that's what it was. It's a 6 millimeter M6 by 1. So threads are all cleaned out. Shout out to my dad for getting this set for me for Christmas. I've been wanting to get a thread chaser set for quite some time, and I've just been putting it off, and then lo and behold, Christmas time comes around. Open it up, and that's what I got. Thanks, Dad. Alright, I got the new hub here. All shiny. And cleaned everything up, got that bolt out of there. Did get that sway bar link. I don't know if you can see that right there, kind of up here. Right. Turn. Right there. Took that out, so that's gone. I'll have to pick up a new one of those. But we'll get everything else put back together. So now moving forward, basically the hub goes into this backer plate. Like so. Just sets in there. That's going to orient to where these two tabs or holes are facing the rear of the vehicle. And then that slips into this knuckle. And everything should just slip right together. There shouldn't be any struggle at all to get that in there. Make sure you clean everything up good. And then I just line up all the holes so that you can see through. And then the other thing that I do is the bolts for this. I use red Loctite. So I'm just going to start one in here for right now just to keep this all together. But the reason why I use red Loctite is because the first time that I did this, years ago, had hubs go bad. And disassembled everything, put it all back together. Started driving the car. Within a couple of days, I heard a clunking noise from the back end. And got the car up in the air. This back left wheel, everything was loose. I could wiggle the wheel around. So, thought I hadn't torqued it. Decided to check the other side. It's loose as well, and I know I torqued that side. So from that point forward, whenever I put this together, I always use Loctite. You don't have to. Some people say red Loctite, oh, that's permanent, you're never going to get that back apart. Well, I just took it all apart just a minute ago, and it had red Loctite on it. So, said use your own discretion on that. I believe there is a torque setting for this. I'm not sure what it is. I run them in with the impact, and then I'll just crank on them with the breaker bar. You can look it up if you want. I'm sure that's listed somewhere. Use my calibrated shoulder and click, that's it. Click, that's it. Good. Torque. Once that's in there again, should have been just a slip fit, nothing's pressed. Should be able to spin that nice and free. Shouldn't bind up, shouldn't have a gap. When you're looking at that here, everything should be tight all the way through, which it is on this one. And now we'll go ahead and work on getting this thing set back up in here. The other thing, there again, anti-seize. I like to put anti-seize on the splines, just so that I know when I go to disassemble this in the future that that's not all rusted in there. Same thing when I just took those apart. That had been together for 170,000 miles. Surprisingly, lasted that long. And I literally just I tapped on them with a hammer, but it wasn't like I had to drive them out of there. They came out really easily. So, get this set back over in here. It's a little difficult to get that up in there, but we'll figure it out. Well, I'm gonna have to regroup here. Struggle off camera. Alright, I was riding the struggle bus there for a little while, but I got it. So, just kind of moving things up and down and getting them all sorted here. So, finally was able to get it. Need to get these 5 bolts put in up in the front just to make sure they're started before I start buttoning up the back end here. So that's what I'm going to work on right now. Alright, so first bolt that I try to get in is this bottom one here, just because it's probably one of the harder ones. And then I'll do the one in the front, and then this one up here, you can kind of pry things around. So, same thing here. A little bit of anti-seize. Just snug that up. And the next one I like to put in is this one over here. Right there. Looking for my small pry bar and what I did with it. try to find that. Hold please. All right, got it. Snug it up a little. And then the last one is this one on the top. And this one's kind of a pain. So yesterday I had to, on the other side, I used a pry bar and then I had a block of wood that I put on here and I was able to push the hub in. So I'm going to grab that block of wood. And more struggles. Anyway, you get the gist of it. I'll struggle in peace or in private. Alright, I was able to get it. It's a lot of messing around. Okay, those are all in. need to pick up a basically a sway bar link for here. I'll have to get that, and then I got to get that bolt that I broke in the top here for the speed sensor. But those are pretty simple. Aside from putting the brakes back together, that's the gist of it. Once I get this down on the ground, I will go ahead and torque these nuts, the axle nuts. I just don't like to do that when it's not on tires. So pretty straightforward. Just this one, because there is so many miles on it, everything's so rusty. Had a couple of small issues, that being a problem, that bolt in there breaking off, and not being able to get that sway bar link out. I ended up having to cut the studs off and just knock the bolts through. But other than that, I can't really expect it to go much better for as old as this vehicle is. So that's your basic, and the right side's the same. There's no difference in them. I think the axle might be just a touch longer, but as far as the process, it's the identical. This should be good for, I think, 2007 to at least 2010, maybe some of the newer ones. I don't know. I've not taken apart any of the newer ones, but not too many people working on these old vehicles, but it's for me, it's got to work with the economy the way that it is. I can't afford to buy a new one, so I got to keep going with what I got. So any questions or comments, leave them, and if you guys could like and subscribe, that would be great. Thanks for watching.